I spoke without thinking to the alien queen. Her reaction terrified everyone. The stars in the sky flickered with the light of distant galaxies, and the hum of the starship echoed through the metallic halls as it sailed through the vast emptiness of space. For the crew of the Celestial Horizon, it was just another mission, another meeting with a species they had never encountered before. This was humanity's first attempt to establish diplomatic relations with the Zillath, an alien race known for their advanced technology and cold, calculating manner. The ship had been traveling for several weeks toward the Zillath homeworld, a journey that was both historic and fraught with tension. The importance of this meeting couldn't be overstated. The fate of humanity's place in the universe rested on this encounter. The Celestial Horizon was the first human ship to approach the Zillath home system, and the eyes of the galaxy were watching. Every move they made, every word they spoke would be under scrutiny. The crew, made up of diplomats, scientists, and military personnel, was given strict instructions. They were to be respectful, formal, and above all, cautious. The Zillath had a reputation for being ruthless, their society based on power, respect, and an ironclad hierarchy. There had been rumors that the Zillath didn't take kindly to mistakes. One wrong word could set off a series of events that would result in disastrous consequences for Earth and its people. As the ship neared the Zillath planet, Commander Elias Grant gathered the crew in the main conference room. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with short, dark hair and a stern expression. His presence commanded respect, but even he seemed nervous as he addressed the room. "This is it, people," he said, his voice low but steady. "We've trained for this moment for years, but remember, this is more than just a meeting. It's the future of humanity. The Zillath don't tolerate failure, and they don't tolerate disrespect. Keep your composure. Keep your thoughts in check. Let's make history, and let's make it right." The crew nodded, each of them aware of the stakes. Among them was Nathaniel West, a young diplomat who had been selected for this mission due to his strong communication skills and understanding of alien cultures. Nathaniel was a quick thinker, sharp with words, and passionate about making human connections. But that day, he felt the weight of the responsibility heavier than ever before. The meeting was scheduled for the Zillath capital city, a place that was as intimidating as it was beautiful. Towering spires of metal and glass stretched toward the sky, their surfaces reflecting the harsh light of the sun. The streets were silent, the city devoid of human life, yet alive with an eerie energy. As the Celestial Horizon entered the planet's orbit, the crew could see the immense scale of the Zillath world, and it made their own planet feel small in comparison. The Zillath delegation arrived in a sleek black transport ship that docked next to the Celestial Horizon. The beings who emerged from the craft were unlike anything the humans had ever seen. They were tall, with skin that shimmered in hues of silver and blue. Their eyes glowed faintly with an otherworldly light, and their movements were fluid, almost unnatural. Their leader, the Zillath Queen, was a towering figure. She was draped in a dark, flowing robe, her face hidden behind a veil of shimmering energy. Her presence was suffocating, her power evident in every step she took. Nathaniel and the rest of the crew stepped forward to greet her, their hearts pounding in their chests. This was the moment. This was where everything could either succeed or fail. "Your Majesty," Commander Grant said, his voice steady but formal, "we come in peace, with the hope of establishing a mutually beneficial relationship between our peoples." The Zillath Queen remained silent, her gaze fixed on them as she assessed the humans. The air was thick with tension. Nathaniel, standing just a few paces behind the commander, tried to remain composed. He had practiced for this moment, rehearsed the perfect words to say. But as he stood there, the weight of the moment pressed down on him, and something unexpected happened. Without thinking, without any filter, Nathaniel blurted out the first thing that came to his mind. "You know, your skin looks fascinating. It's like liquid metal." "How do you?" The words hung in the air like a dagger. As soon as Nathaniel spoke, he realized his mistake. His eyes widened, his breath caught in his throat. What had he said? It was supposed to be a simple compliment, but in that moment it felt like the biggest mistake of his life. The silence in the room deepened, suffocating everyone in its weight. The crew looked at each other nervously, their expressions a mixture of shock and horror. The Zillath Queen's face, though hidden behind her veil, seemed to stiffen. A low, humming energy filled the room, an unsettling vibration that made the hair on the back of Nathaniel's neck stand up. The queen's eyes, glowing with an almost supernatural light, turned to Nathaniel. There was no warmth in them, no understanding, just cold, calculating power. For a moment, Nathaniel thought he might faint under the weight of her gaze. The seconds stretched into eternity. No one spoke. The silence was unbearable. Nathaniel's mind raced as he desperately tried to think of a way to salvage the situation, but the damage had already been done. Then, the queen moved. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she raised her hand. The gesture wasn't threatening, but the sheer force of it seemed to command the room. The hum in the air grew louder, more intense, as if something was building to an unbearable climax. Nathaniel felt a cold sweat break out on his brow. He glanced around the room. The other members of the crew were all standing frozen, their eyes wide with fear. Even Commander Grant seemed to have lost his composure, his face pale. He had never seen his crew this terrified, not even in the most dangerous situations they had faced. This was different. This was something else entirely. And then, to Nathaniel's surprise, the queen spoke. Her voice was not the thunderous roar he had expected. Instead, it was calm, almost serene. But it carried an edge that sent shivers down his spine. "You are a brave one, human," she said, her voice echoing through the room like a whisper in a storm. "But words are dangerous. You would do well to learn that in my presence." The words felt like a weight around Nathaniel's chest. His mind raced as he struggled to comprehend the gravity of the situation. Was this it? Was this the end of humanity's chance at peace with the Zillath? For a long moment, there was nothing but silence again. The crew stood, frozen in place, as the queen's gaze never wavered from Nathaniel. And just when it seemed like things could not get worse, the queen spoke again, her voice colder now, yet with an underlying sense of understanding. "Let this be a lesson, human. Respect must be earned, not given away so carelessly." And just like that, the tension in the room seemed to shift. The queen lowered her hand, and the energy that had filled the air dissipated. Nathaniel let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, but he knew that whatever happened next, things had changed. The queen's reaction had terrified everyone, and no one would forget the weight of those words. This was just the beginning. The real test had yet to come. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Nathaniel West stood frozen in place, his heart hammering in his chest. His impulsive words still echoed in his mind, louder now than ever. He had expected some sort of response from the Zillath Queen, but nothing could have prepared him for the chilling silence that followed. He had made a mistake, a huge one, and now it seemed like the entire crew was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The Zillath Queen, though she had lowered her hand, still held herself with an air of unshakable authority. Her eyes glowed faintly, their eerie light boring into Nathaniel as though she could see right through him. He couldn't help but feel like he was being judged, his every thought and action scrutinized by this alien being who seemed to carry the weight of an entire civilization within her. The room was so silent that Nathaniel could hear his own heartbeat, echoing like thunder in his ears. The other members of the crew, those who had been trained for this moment, stood just as still, their faces pale and their eyes wide with fear. Commander Grant, always the picture of confidence, now seemed like a shadow of himself, his lips pressed into a thin line. No one knew how to react. I didn't mean to offend your majesty," Nathaniel stammered, his voice shaking despite his best efforts to stay calm. He had to fix this. He had to find a way to salvage the situation before it was too late. But no matter how much he thought about it, he couldn't come up with the right words. What could he possibly say to make this right? The queen did not respond immediately. She simply watched him, her gaze unwavering. Nathaniel felt as though he were shrinking under her stare, each passing second feeling like an eternity. He could feel the heat rising in his cheeks, his palms sweating despite the cold, controlled environment of the room. He was a diplomat, trained to handle difficult situations, yet now he felt like a child caught in a lie. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the queen spoke again. Her voice was low, smooth, and unsettling in its calmness. "You misunderstand the nature of my words, human," she said, her tone sharp but controlled. "It is not the compliment you offered that bothers me. It is the assumption behind it. You see, to you, my appearance may seem unusual, fascinating even. But to my people, our form is sacred. It is our strength, our identity, and when you speak of it so casually, it is a sign of disrespect. Do you understand now?" Nathaniel swallowed hard, his throat dry. He nodded, though the weight of her words was far heavier than he had anticipated. He understood now, but it did little to ease the dread that had settled in his stomach. He had made a foolish mistake, one that could have cost humanity its chance at an alliance with the Zillath. I do understand, Your Majesty, he said quietly, his voice full of regret. I didn't mean any harm, I was just trying to make conversation. The Queen's expression remained unreadable, her glowing eyes never leaving him. You will learn that words have power. In our culture, every word, every action is weighed carefully. A single misstep can change the course of events in ways you cannot imagine. Do not take this lesson lightly, human. Nathaniel felt a shiver run down his spine at the weight of her words. He knew this wasn't just a lesson for him. It was a warning to everyone in the room, to humanity as a whole. The Zillath were not a species that tolerated mistakes, especially not when it came to matters of respect. The implications were clear. The fate of this mission of Earth itself could be determined by his next words and actions. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. Nathaniel dared not speak again, unsure of what else he could say. He could feel the eyes of the crew on him, some filled with fear, others with uncertainty. But all of them were waiting for the Queen's next move, the next step in this delicate dance of diplomacy. It was then that the Queen finally took a step forward. Her movement was slow, deliberate, as though she were considering each one of them carefully. The weight of her presence seemed to intensify with each step, pressing down on Nathaniel and his crew like a heavy stone. You have potential, she said, her voice still calm but tinged with something else, something Nathaniel couldn't quite place. Your species has a great deal of power if only you would learn to control it, but power alone is not enough. It is the way you use that power, the way you respect the strength of others, that will determine your survival in this galaxy. Nathaniel nodded, his throat still tight. We will respect that, Your Majesty. I will learn. We all will. His words felt weak, but they were all he could offer in that moment. The Queen's gaze softened just slightly, though it was hard to tell if it was approval or mere indifference. She studied him for a moment longer before turning her attention to the rest of the crew. You all will have to prove yourselves, she said, her voice growing sharper again. Your actions today have shown me that humanity is capable of making foolish mistakes. But it has also shown me that you are willing to learn. That is why I have decided to allow you this opportunity. But know this, one more mistake, one more instance of disrespect, and your species will be treated as nothing more than a curiosity. An insignificant blip in the galaxy, you will be watched. There it was, the final warning. Nathaniel's heart sank. He could feel the eyes of the crew on him, some of them now visibly relieved, others still unsure. He had never felt so small in his life. And yet he knew that this moment would define humanity's future. The Queen turned away then, signaling the end of the tense moment. We will proceed with the next part of our negotiations, she said, her voice no longer filled with the same intimidating energy, but still carrying the weight of her authority. But know that this is your final chance. Prove that humanity can control its impulses, and you may earn our trust. Fail, and you will regret it. With that, the Zillath delegation began to move, the crew stepping aside to allow them to pass. Nathaniel stood still, the weight of what had just happened crashing down on him. His mistake had nearly cost them everything. His heart was still racing, and he could feel his legs shaking beneath him. Commander Grant was the first to speak, his voice low and filled with a mixture of relief and anger. You'll have to be more careful next time, West, he said, his tone tight. We can't afford another slip-up. Nathaniel nodded, his mind still spinning. He knew the commander was right. This was a delicate balance they were walking. One wrong move, and it could all come crumbling down. He had just learned that the hard way. As the Zillath delegation moved into another chamber to continue their discussions, the humans were left standing in the quiet aftermath. There was a strange sense of dread hanging in the air, as though the universe itself was watching them, waiting for their next move. And Nathaniel, for the first time in his life, truly understood the weight of what it meant to be human in a galaxy full of powerful, ancient civilizations. There was no turning back now. The stakes had never been higher, and humanity's future had never seemed so uncertain. Nathaniel West couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking on a tightrope. The events of the previous meeting with the Zillath Queen had shaken him more than he cared to admit. It wasn't just the fear of making a mistake again. It was the overwhelming realization that humanity, despite its advancements, was so small in the grand scheme of the universe. The Queen's warning had been clear, and he knew that if things didn't go right, Earth could be cast aside like any other insignificant species. The crew gathered in the main conference room on the celestial horizon, preparing for the next phase of the meeting with the Zillath. The atmosphere was tense, but there was a newfound sense of resolve among them. They had narrowly escaped disaster, and now they had to prove they could handle the delicate nature of their mission. Commander Elias Grant stood at the front of the room, his face still tense but his voice steady. "We're not out of the woods yet," he began, addressing the crew. "The Queen has given us another chance, but this is it. One more mistake and it's over. Do you understand?" The crew nodded, their expressions serious. Nathaniel, though still shaken, stood among them, trying to keep his composure. The weight of his earlier mistake hung over him, but he knew he couldn't afford to dwell on it. They had a second chance, and he had to make it count. "We'll proceed with the next part of the negotiations," Grant continued. "We don't know exactly what the Zillath are expecting from us, but we've prepared for everything. Let's make sure we don't screw this up." Nathaniel's mind wandered for a moment. The Zillath were a powerful race, but what did they want from humanity? What were the stakes for them? He had no answers. All he knew was that the Queen had made it clear that respect was everything. One wrong move and they could be out of the running. There was no room for mistakes, not now. After the meeting, the crew was called to a different part of the ship. There was an air of anticipation as they boarded the transport that would take them to the Zillath capital city. The Queen had invited them to a formal gathering, and the crew was expected to participate in a cultural exchange. Nathaniel had no idea what to expect, but he knew that it would be a test of humanity's ability to adapt and fit into the Zillath way of life. The ship entered the Zillath capital's atmosphere, and Nathaniel watched as the towering spires of the city came into view. It was a breathtaking sight. The city was unlike anything he had ever seen, clean, sharp lines of architecture made of materials that shimmered under the light. The buildings stretched to the sky, their smooth surfaces reflecting the harsh sunlight. The air seemed to hum with an almost unnatural energy, and Nathaniel couldn't help but feel that they were entering a world far beyond human understanding. The transport ship landed with a soft thud, and the crew stepped out onto the platform. The Zillath delegation was waiting for them, their tall, imposing figures standing at attention. The Queen, as always, was at the forefront, her presence commanding the space around her. Her glowing eyes scanned the crew as they approached. Nathaniel felt the weight of her gaze, and despite his best efforts, his heart skipped a beat. He had made a mistake before, and now he had to make sure he didn't make another. But what could he say? What could he do? The pressure was mounting, and it felt as if the eyes of the entire galaxy were on him. The Queen regarded them for a moment before speaking, her voice calm and measured. "Humanity has proven itself to be resilient," she said, her words cutting through the tension like a knife. "You have not faltered under pressure. That is a strength, one that many species do not possess, but resilience alone is not enough. You must learn to wield your power wisely. Show me that you can." The crew stood still, the Queen's words echoing in their minds. Nathaniel couldn't help but wonder what the Queen meant by that. What was she asking of them? They had already proven themselves in one way, but it wasn't clear what they still had to prove. And what would happen if they failed again? The Zillath delegation led them into the heart of the city, where a grand hall awaited them. It was a vast space, the walls lined with shimmering panels that seemed to shift and change with the light. At the center of the hall was a massive, oval table, made of what appeared to be a glowing, crystalline substance. The Zillath seated themselves on one side, and the humans took their places on the other. For a moment, no one spoke. Nathaniel glanced around at his fellow crew members. They all seemed nervous, unsure of what was coming next. He could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on them, each second more suffocating than the last. The Queen was the first to break the silence. "This is your final test," she said, her voice resonating through the hall. "If you truly wish to join the intergalactic community, you must prove that you can navigate the complexities of power, respect, and negotiation. This is not just a meeting. It is a challenge. A challenge to see if humanity is ready for the responsibility of joining us." Nathaniel's heart began to race again. A test. They had been warned before, but now it felt real. The Queen was not just testing their ability to be respectful. She was testing their intelligence, their strength, and their ability to survive in a galaxy that was not kind to the weak. The challenge was set. The Zillath Queen began to lay out a series of complex scenarios, each one more difficult than the last. They involved negotiations with other alien species, survival in hostile environments, and situations where humanity would have to make tough choices. It wasn't just about diplomacy anymore. It was about humanity's ability to endure and adapt to the challenges of the universe. Nathaniel listened closely, his mind racing as he processed the information. He had been prepared for many things, but this was unlike anything he had imagined. The Queen wasn't just testing their ability to work with the Zillath, she was testing their very nature as a species. How would they handle power? How would they deal with the consequences of their decisions? The first scenario presented was a negotiation with an alien species that was known for its aggressive nature. The crew had to decide whether to push for a peaceful resolution or to stand firm and demand respect. It was a delicate balance. If they were too aggressive, they risked angering the species and starting a war. But if they backed down too much, they would show weakness. There was no clear answer. Nathaniel felt the weight of the decision on his shoulders. He looked to Commander Grant, hoping for guidance, but the commander's expression was unreadable. He was as uncertain as the rest of them. The tension was palpable, and the room seemed to shrink with each passing second. Finally, it was Nathaniel's turn to speak. He could feel the weight of the Queen's gaze upon him, the pressure of the entire situation pressing down on him. He took a deep breath, his mind focused on the challenge at hand. "We must approach this situation with caution," Nathaniel began, his voice steady despite the fear that was building inside him. "Aggression will not serve us, but neither will complete submission. We must find a way to stand firm while still offering a path to peace. We have to prove that humanity can negotiate with strength and respect, not just brute force." The Queen's eyes narrowed slightly as she listened. There was a long silence before she finally spoke. "You have learned well, human," she said, her voice softening just a fraction. "You understand that power is not just about force. It is about knowing when to push and when to yield. Your species has potential." Nathaniel let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He had passed the first test, but it was clear that there were more challenges ahead. The Zillath were watching closely, and they would not make things easy. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Nathaniel felt a spark of hope. They had been given a chance, and now they had to prove that they could be worthy of it. Nathaniel could feel his heart pounding in his chest as the next challenge was laid out before him. The stakes had never been higher, and he could feel the weight of every decision pressing down on him. The Zillath Queen, with her calm yet imposing presence, had already made it clear that humanity was being watched closely. One wrong move, one mistake, and they could lose everything. The atmosphere in the Grand Hall was suffocating. The air felt heavy with the expectations of the Zillath and the nervous energy of the human crew. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath, unsure of what was coming next. Commander Grant had said they were not out of the woods yet, and Nathaniel knew that each moment brought them closer to either success or failure. They had made it this far, but there was still so much they had to prove. The Queen's voice echoed through the room, cutting through the tension like a knife. "Your species has shown resilience," she began, her eyes glowing softly in the dim light. "But resilience alone will not be enough to earn your place among us. You must prove that you can handle the responsibility of power. You must show that you can navigate the complexities of the universe, not just with strength, but with wisdom." Her words hung in the air, their weight pressing down on Nathaniel. He had heard the stories about the Zillath, how their civilization was built on strength, on hierarchy, on the survival of the fittest. He had always thought that humanity had its own strengths, its own unique qualities. But now, facing the Queen's cold gaze, he realized just how much more there was to learn. "You will face another test," the Queen continued. "A test not of strength, but of judgment. Humanity must prove that it can handle the responsibility that comes with power, that it can navigate the difficult choices that we must all face. The future of your species depends on the decisions you make now." The room fell silent. The Queen's words had a finality to them that left no room for doubt. Nathaniel looked around at his fellow crew members, all of them standing in tense silence. Some of them were trying to hide their nervousness, while others were staring straight ahead, as though they were trying to steel themselves for whatever was coming. He couldn't help but feel the same way. The pressure was overwhelming, and then the challenge was revealed. A holographic projection appeared in the center of the room, showing a planet in the midst of a violent conflict. The image zoomed in to reveal two groups of alien species, both fighting for control of the planet's resources. The situation was dire. The war had already claimed countless lives, and there seemed to be no end in sight. The humans were given a choice. They could intervene, offering military support to one side and ensuring victory, or they could negotiate a peace, offering both sides a chance at survival. Nathaniel stared at the projection, his mind racing. The decision was a difficult one. On the one hand, they could offer military support and ensure the conflict came to an end quickly, but that would mean choosing sides and potentially condemning one group to defeat. On the other hand, negotiating peace was a longer and more complicated route, one that might fail and lead to even more suffering. But how could they just sit back and do nothing? How could they allow this violence to continue? He glanced at Commander Grant, hoping for some guidance, but the commander's face was unreadable. This was a decision they would have to make on their own. Nathaniel took a deep breath, trying to steady his thoughts. He had to think carefully. The Queen's words echoed in his mind. Power was not enough. Wisdom was what mattered. He needed to think beyond the immediate outcome. What was best for everyone, not just for the humans? The decision weighed heavily on his mind. He could hear the quiet murmurs of his crew behind him, each of them unsure of what to say or do. The weight of the Queen's expectations was palpable. "We cannot rush to judgment," Nathaniel said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "We must find a solution that brings peace to both sides. We cannot allow ourselves to become entangled in a conflict that is not ours to fight." The Queen's gaze never wavered. "You are correct," she said, her voice cold but thoughtful. "But peace is not always easy to achieve. It requires compromise, and sometimes it requires sacrifice. Are you willing to make that sacrifice?" Nathaniel swallowed hard, the words cutting through him like a blade. Could humanity make such a sacrifice? Could they accept that the path to peace might not be a clear one? He didn't have all the answers, but he knew that choosing the easy path would be a mistake. "I believe humanity can handle the responsibility of peace," Nathaniel said, his voice stronger now. "We have the capacity for understanding, for compromise. But we must be willing to listen to both sides, to understand their needs, and to help them see that war is not the answer." The Queen regarded him for a long moment, her eyes glowing softly in the darkness. Then, with a slight nod, she turned her attention to the rest of the crew. "You have shown wisdom," she said, her voice carrying the weight of her approval. "But wisdom alone is not enough. You must now prove that you can carry out your decisions, even when the consequences are uncertain. We will see if humanity is truly ready to navigate the complexities of the universe." Nathaniel let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The Queen's approval was a relief, but he knew it wasn't the end. There were still more tests to come, more decisions to make. But for the first time since the meeting began, he felt a small glimmer of hope. Maybe humanity did have a chance after all. The Queen turned away, signaling the end of the challenge. The projection of the war-torn planet vanished, leaving only the lingering tension in the room. Nathaniel's thoughts were still racing, but now there was a sense of purpose. They had made the right choice. They had chosen peace over violence, understanding over conquest. But was that enough to prove humanity's worth? As the Zilath delegation filed out of the room, leaving the humans to reflect on their decision, Nathaniel couldn't shake the feeling that they had just stepped into a much larger, more dangerous world. The universe was vast, and they were only beginning to understand its complexities. But if they could continue to make choices with wisdom, if they could prove that they were capable of learning and growing, maybe they could find their place in this galaxy. As he walked out of the room with the rest of the crew, Nathaniel felt the weight of the mission settle back onto his shoulders. The Zilath had given them a chance, but it wasn't over yet. There would be more tests, more challenges. But they had passed this one, and that was a victory in itself. "We did it," one of the crew members said, their voice filled with relief. "We actually did it." Nathaniel nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "For now," he said, his voice full of determination. "But we have to keep proving ourselves. This is just the beginning." And as the crew moved forward, with the future of humanity hanging in the balance, Nathaniel couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. They had chosen the harder path, the one that required understanding and sacrifice. They had chosen peace, and that perhaps was the first step toward truly finding their place in the stars. The tension in the air was palpable as the final test approached. Nathaniel could feel it in his bones, the weight of the challenge, the pressure to succeed. The Zillath Queen's expectations had been clear, and though humanity had made it through the previous tests, Nathaniel knew that this last hurdle would be the ultimate one. The final test wasn't just about intelligence, strength, or wisdom. It was about something deeper, something that would prove whether humanity could truly stand among the stars as equals. The crew of the Celestial Horizon was gathered once again in the Grand Hall, the same room where the earlier trials had taken place. This time, however, the atmosphere was different. There was no projection, no holograms. The Queen stood before them, her figure towering and regal as ever, her glowing eyes fixed on them with an intensity that left no room for doubt. The silence was deafening. The crew had been through so much already, but the final test loomed ahead, an uncertainty that none of them could ignore. Nathaniel's heart was pounding in his chest, his hands clammy despite his best efforts to stay composed. He could see it in the eyes of the other crew members, fear, hope, and uncertainty all mixed together. They had come so far, but what lay ahead was still unknown. The Queen spoke, her voice cutting through the silence. "You have demonstrated intelligence, resilience, and wisdom. But there is one final question that remains. A question that will determine whether you, humanity, are ready for the responsibility that comes with joining the intergalactic community." Nathaniel stood tall, though he felt as if his legs might give way at any moment. He had been through so many emotions in the past few days, fear, regret, hope. But now, standing before the Queen, he couldn't help but wonder if it was all worth it. Could humanity really prove itself in the eyes of the Zillath? The Queen's voice was steady as she continued. "Your species has made mistakes, yes, but you have learned, you have shown that you are capable of growth. That is why I am offering you this last test." She paused, her eyes scanning the room. "The question is simple. Can you let go of the past? Can you forgive your own mistakes and move forward with the knowledge that your future is not bound by what you have done, but by what you are willing to become?" Nathaniel's mind raced as the words sank in. The Queen was asking them to let go of their past, to forgive themselves for their mistakes, and to move forward with a new vision. He realized that this wasn't just a test for humanity, it was a test for him personally. He had made mistakes, too, and the weight of those errors had burdened him since the moment he blurted out his comment about the Queen's appearance. Could he forgive himself? Could he move on, knowing that his actions had nearly doomed humanity's chance at peace with the Zillath? The Queen stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "You are not the first species to have made mistakes," she said, her voice softening slightly. "But you are the first to show such willingness to learn from them. That is why I am giving you this opportunity." Nathaniel's breath caught in his throat as he realized what she was asking of them. It wasn't just about proving strength or intelligence. It was about showing humility. It was about acknowledging their flaws and being willing to grow beyond them. Humanity's future didn't depend on being perfect. It depended on their ability to overcome their imperfections and move forward, stronger and wiser than before. The Queen's eyes narrowed slightly as she studied Nathaniel. "I have seen your potential," she said, her voice full of quiet authority. "Now you must prove that you are worthy of the path ahead. Will you accept this challenge?" Nathaniel took a deep breath, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He had spent so much of his life striving for perfection, trying to avoid mistakes at all costs. But now, he realized that the key to humanity's success wasn't avoiding mistakes. It was embracing them, learning from them, and using that knowledge to forge a better future. "I accept," Nathaniel said, his voice steady and clear. He looked around at the rest of the crew, their faces filled with uncertainty. But as his gaze met theirs, he saw something shift. He saw the same resolve that he was feeling, the same willingness to move forward. They had all made mistakes, but they had all learned from them. Together they were stronger, and together they would face whatever came next. The Queen nodded, a slight smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Good, you have passed the final test. But remember, this is not the end of your journey. It is only the beginning." With those words, the atmosphere in the room seemed to shift. The heavy tension lifted, replaced by a sense of calm, a sense of purpose. Nathaniel could feel it deep within him. They had done it. Humanity had proven that it was capable of growth, of learning from its mistakes, and of embracing the future with open arms. The Queen turned away, signaling the end of the meeting. "You may now return to your ship," she said, her voice carrying a note of finality. The path ahead is open to you, but you will face many challenges. You will face others who are not as forgiving, not as willing to help you. But I believe you are ready. The galaxy will now watch you as you step into the future. Nathaniel felt a mixture of emotions, relief, pride, and even a touch of fear. The Zillath Queen had given them a chance, but the future was still uncertain. They had made it this far, but what would the next steps bring? What other challenges awaited them in the vast, unpredictable expanse of space? As the crew made their way back to the celestial horizon, the weight of the journey ahead settled on Nathaniel's shoulders. But for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of hope. They had faced their mistakes, acknowledged their flaws, and come out stronger for it. The future was no longer something to fear. It was something to embrace. Back on the ship, the crew gathered in the main lounge, the atmosphere lighter than it had been in days. They had made it through the trials, and now they could look toward the future. But as Nathaniel sat down with the others, his mind wandered back to the Queen's final words. The galaxy will now watch you. It was a daunting thought, knowing that humanity's every move would be scrutinized. But Nathaniel also realized that it was an opportunity. The chance to prove that humanity could not only survive but thrive in this vast, complicated universe. They had been given a second chance, and they would make it count. As the ship prepared for its next journey, heading deeper into the stars, Nathaniel looked out the window at the vast expanse of space. The unknown stretched out before them, filled with infinite possibilities. Humanity was just beginning its journey, and there was no telling where it would lead. But for the first time, Nathaniel felt ready. The future was uncertain, but humanity had the power to shape it. He turned to his fellow crew members, a smile creeping onto his face. "We've made it this far," he said, his voice full of determination. "Now let's show them what we're capable of." And with that, the celestial horizon sped off into the unknown, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead.